Ace Frehley set down his guitar. Walked off stage. Mid-encore. 15,000 people waited in silence because he'd understood the look. Madison Square Garden. October 1978. The encore was supposed to be triumphant. Kiss had just finished a 2-hour set, pyrotechnics, blood, fire, the full spectacle. The crowd was on its feet, screaming for more. Gene and Paul were already back on stage, Paul's hand raised to the audience in that practiced rock god gesture. Ace walked back out last. Always last. Guitar slung low. No makeup left to speak of, it had melted under the lights hours ago, streaking down to reveal the man underneath. He didn't wave. Didn't acknowledge the roar. Just moved to his position stage right, reached for his Les Paul, adjusted the strap. The band launched into the opening of Shock Me, Ace's song, his showcase, the moment in every Kiss show where the Spaceman stepped forward and proved he wasn't just makeup and rockets. First verse. Crowd singing every word. Gene on his platform. Paul working the catwalk. Peter's drums thundering behind. And then Ace looked down. Not at the stage. Not at his fretboard. Down into the front row, where a man stood pressed against the barrier. 50-something. Gray beard. Denim jacket with the sleeves cut off. Crying. Not the usual rock concert crying. Not ecstasy or beer or adrenaline. Real crying. The kind that comes from somewhere deep. The kind that hurts to watch. The man's eyes locked onto Ace's. And in that look was something Ace recognized immediately. Something he'd spent his entire career trying to escape from. Recognition. Ace's fingers stopped moving. He didn't finish the verse. The guitar sustained its last note, and then fell silent. Gene and Paul kept playing for another 4 bars before they realized something was wrong. The music stumbled. Fell apart. Stopped. 15,000 people went quiet. Ace didn't defend himself. He never did. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1964. Ace Frehley wasn't Ace Frehley yet. He was Paul Frehley. 18 years old. Living in the Bronx with his parents and 3 siblings in a 3rd-floor walk-up where the heat didn't work half the winter and the neighbors' arguments came through the walls every night. He had a guitar. A cheap Harmony Electric his father had bought him from a pawn shop 2 years earlier after Ace promised, swore. He'd stop getting in trouble at school if he could just have an instrument. The guitar was everything. Ace didn't talk much. Didn't have many friends. Struggled in school with reading and numbers. But put him in a room with 6 strings and an amplifier and something happened. Something wordless and perfect and completely his own. His father didn't understand it. Carl Frehley was a good man who worked construction and believed in practical skills and didn't see how playing rock and roll could possibly lead to anything resembling a life. But Ace's older brother, Charlie, understood. Charlie was 23. He worked at the brewery. Had a wife and a baby daughter. Lived 2 blocks away in an even smaller apartment. He'd come over Tuesday nights after work, bring beer for their father, and sit in Ace's tiny bedroom listening to him play. "You're good, Polly," Charlie would say, using the family nickname. "I mean really good. Not just neighborhood good. Real good." Ace never knew what to say to that. So he'd just play. In the fall of 1964, Charlie started bringing something with him on Tuesday nights. A notebook. He'd sit on Ace's bed and write while Ace played, not the music, but observations. Questions. Plans. "You ever think about doing this for real?" Charlie asked one night in October. "Like actually trying? Going to the city, finding other musicians, seeing if you could make something?" Ace looked up from his guitar. "Dad would kill me. Dad thinks the world ends at the Bronx border. But Polly, listen, I've been saving. Not much, but some. Enough to get you a better guitar. Maybe help with rent somewhere if you found other guys to play with. I'm serious. I think you could do this." Ace had stared at his brother. This was Charlie, responsible Charlie, married Charlie, father Charlie. talking about bankrolling a pipe dream. Why? Ace asked. Charlie smiled. Because I can't. But you can. And someone in this family should get out. For 3 months, Charlie saved. He picked up extra shifts at the brewery. Skipped lunch. Didn't tell his wife because she would have asked questions he didn't want to answer. By January 1965, he'd saved $240. Enough for a decent used guitar and 2 months' share of rent in some apartment in Manhattan if Ace could find roommates. Charlie was going to give it to Ace on his 19th birthday. February 2nd. He'd already picked out the guitar, a used Gibson at a shop in Greenwich Village he'd scouted 3 times to make sure it was still there. On January 28, 1965, Charlie Frehley was working a double shift at the brewery. Moving kegs. Heavy work. He'd been up since 4 a.m. At 9 p.m., exhausted, he made a mistake. Slipped. Fell wrong. The keg he was moving came down on his chest. The ambulance took 20 minutes. By the time they got him to the hospital, Charlie was gone. Ace found out from his mother. She was screaming. His father was crying. Ace stood in the kitchen of their apartment, the same kitchen where Charlie had sat drinking coffee just 3 days earlier, talking about amplifiers and gigs, and felt the floor drop away. At the funeral, Charlie's wife pulled Ace aside. She handed him an envelope. Inside was $240 in cash and a note in Charlie's handwriting. Polly. Get out. Play. Don't stop. See. Ace bought the Gibson. Moved to Manhattan. Found musicians. Struggled for years. Changed his name to Ace because Paul Frehley sounded too ordinary for what he was trying to become. By 1973, he was in Kiss. By 1975, they were famous. By 1978, they were one of the biggest bands in the world. But Ace never forgot that Charlie hadn't lived to see any of it. That his brother had believed in him when no one else did, not even Ace himself, and had died before seeing if he'd been right. Subscribe and leave a comment, because some moments only make sense when we remember them together. The man in the front row at Madison Square Garden was holding something. Ace saw it now in the stage lights. A photograph. Pressed against the barrier. A picture of 2 men, one young, one older. Standing in front of a brewery. The older man's arm around the younger man's shoulders. The man holding the photograph looked up at Ace with that expression that said, I know. I was there too. I had someone. I lost them. Ace stood frozen on stage. Jean and Paul were looking at him, confused. Peter had stopped drumming entirely. The crowd was murmuring, uncertain what was happening. Ace very slowly removed his guitar. Unstrapped it. Set it down on the stage with a care that seemed almost ceremonial. He walked to the edge of the stage. Knelt down. Looked at the man directly. Who'd you lose? Ace asked. Not into the microphone. Just man to man. The guy's voice cracked. My son. 2 years ago. Car accident. He loved you. Said you were the real thing. Said you played like you meant it. Ace nodded slowly. What was his name? Michael. Ace was quiet for a long moment. 15,000 people watching this conversation they couldn't quite hear. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, the jacket he wore under the makeup and the costume, the civilian jacket, and pulled out a guitar pick. One of his personal ones, not the stage picks. He handed it to the man. Charlie, Ace said quietly. My brother. 1965, same thing. I play every show for him. The man took the pick with shaking hands. Started sobbing openly. Ace stood up. Walked back across the stage. Picked up his guitar. Strapped it back on. He looked at Jean and Paul. We're not doing Shock Me, he said into the stage mic, voice flat, matter-of-fact. Jean started to protest. Ace cut him off. We're doing Beth. Peter's ballad. The quiet one. The song with no pyrotechnics, no theatrics, no spectacle. Just piano and voice and grief. Jean and Paul exchanged glances but didn't argue. Something in Ace's tone said this wasn't negotiable. Peter counted off. Started the piano. His voice, raw, unrehearsed for this moment, filled the arena. Beth, I hear you calling. Ace didn't play. Just stood there with his guitar hanging silent, watching the man in the front row hold that photograph and cry while 15,000 strangers sang a song about missing someone. Away from the spotlight, Ace made a choice no one expected. After the show, after the final bow, after the lights came up, after the crew started breaking down equipment, Ace didn't go back to the dressing room. He sat on the edge of the stage, still in his makeup, still in his costume, just sitting in the empty arena while the crew worked around him. The man from the front row was still there. Security had let him wait. He stood at the barrier, photograph still in his hands, looking up at Ace like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to be there. Come up, Ace said. The man climbed onto the stage, walked over slowly, sat down next to Ace, legs dangling over the edge. They didn't talk for a while. Just sat in the silence of an empty arena that had been deafening 2 hours earlier. Finally, the man said, Michael would have lost his mind seeing this. Being up here. Tell me about him, Ace said. So the man did. For 20 minutes he talked about his son. Ace listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't offer platitudes. Just listened the way someone who's carried the same weight knows how to listen. When the man finished, Ace stood up. Wait here. He walked backstage. Came back 5 minutes later carrying his spare guitar, not the stage Les Paul, but his personal guitar, the one he warmed up with before shows. He handed it to the man. This was Charlie's idea. The guitar. He saved up. Never got to see me play it. He paused. Michael saw you. He knew you loved him. That matters more than you know. The man tried to refuse. Ace wouldn't let him. It's not charity, Ace said. It's what we do. We give away what we wish we could give to the ones who aren't here. The man left carrying the guitar. Ace watched him go. Then he sat back down on the empty stage and stayed there until the crew told him they needed to lock up. What followed silenced everyone who heard about it. The story spread quietly. Not in magazines. Not in interviews. Ace never talked about it publicly. But the man, his name was Robert Torres, told people. Michael's friends. Their family. Other fathers who'd lost sons. Word traveled in circles where grief lives. For years afterward, people would show up at Kiss shows in the front row holding photographs. Ace would see them. He never stopped the Encore again. That was a one-time thing, unrepeatable. But he'd find them afterward. Or send someone to bring them backstage. He'd listen. He'd give them pics, set lists, sometimes equipment. Never for press. Never for credit. When asked about it years later by a journalist who'd heard the stories, Ace just shrugged. People think rock and roll is about being loud, he said. Sometimes it's about knowing when to be quiet. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. The photograph Robert Torres had held that night at Madison Square Garden, the one of him and Michael, was later donated to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It sits in the archives now, next to one of Ace's stage guitars. No plaque. No explanation. Just two fathers who loved their sons, connected by one night when the music stopped and the truth was louder. Ace Frehley never played Shock Me the same way after that night. Something in it shifted. Less showmanship. More weight. When people asked what changed, he'd say nothing. But those who knew could hear it. Charlie's note, "Get out. Play. Don't stop." Stayed in Ace's guitar case for the rest of his career. He never showed it to anyone. But before every show, he'd touch the case. A private ritual. A promise kept. The guitar he gave Robert Torres that night is still played. Robert's grandson learned on it. Carries it to open mic nights in the Bronx. Doesn't know the full story yet. Someday he will. Years later, a journalist asked Ace if he regretted stopping the Encore that night at Madison Square Garden. Ace was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You don't regret showing up for people." That was all he said. But there's more to the story that almost no one knows. 3 years after that night, Ace was going through a rough period. The band was fracturing. His drinking had gotten worse. He was questioning everything, whether the music still mattered, whether any of it had been worth it. He got a letter. No return address. Inside was a Polaroid photograph, a young man, maybe 19, holding the guitar Ace had given Robert Torres. The kid was on stage somewhere small, maybe a bar, smiling. On the back, in different handwriting, "This is my grandson. He plays because of what you did. Robert passed last month. Wanted you to know the guitar is still working. Still matters. Maria Torres." Ace kept that Polaroid in the same case as Charlie's note. On the days when nothing made sense, when the business crushed him, when he forgot why he'd started, he'd look at those 2 pieces of paper. Charlie's handwriting. A stranger's grandson holding a guitar. Proof that showing up echoes longer than any encore ever could.